our prayer this morning is by Frederick Gillis. Spirit of community in which we share and find strength and common purpose. We turn our minds and hearts toward one another, seeking to bring into our circle of concern all who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who are in pain, either in body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. As part of this sacred prayer, I invite you now to say aloud names of those you would have us lift up and hold in our care and love today. We are part of a web of life that makes us one with all humanity, one with all the universe. We are grateful for the miracle of consciousness that we share, the consciousness that gives us the power to remember, to love, and to care. Amen. The morning is by Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich, writing from Michigan. Before I moved to Michigan, friends warned me about the long months of overcast skies. I'd lived in climates where winter came with snow and freezing temperatures, but also included plenty of sunshine and that sharp cobalt reserved for particularly cold days. Here, though, the latter two seemed to vanish sometime in November. By the time April rolls around, I find the blue that returns to the sky confusing. My brain can't quite make sense of it. My eyes are so to anything other than gray that they don't know how to process the richness of another color. It's as though they've survived on thin gruel for several months and are suddenly presented with molten chocolate cake. I can fall into living like that too, hunkered down, nose to the grindstone, out of touch with what feeds my soul. I'll focus so much on getting through the bare essentials of the day that I'm not sure what to do when an opportunity for joy pops up. Is it real? Do I deserve technicolor experiences? Shouldn't I keep my expectations low, since the gray will inevitably return? Then I remind myself that my singular life is part of that technicolor tapestry, along with the tumbling waterfalls and purring cats and unfurling blossoms. I can no more step outside the vibrant flow of life than I can reverse the cycle of the seasons. However imperfectly I may be living this life of mine, there's no one better at it, and there's no one else who can do it for me. Well, the gray days aren't over yet. There's still joy to be found in the sight of bare branches against a luminous sky. A veil may obscure the vivid hues for now, but I look with new eyes for the essential richness underneath. This morning's sermon was inspired in part by our UU Meeting House newsletter. From time to time at the top of a new edition, our editor Kathleen plays with the words of the theme she has chosen. If the topic is change, for instance, she will list all of the expressions with the word change in them. Change of heart, change your mind, spare change, see change, change of pace, don't go changing to try to please me. So, as the season turns, have you noticed that for over a month, my sermons have all been about the changing of the season and the coming of spring? This is because I'm going to keep on preaching about it until Mother Nature listens up and makes it happen. I'm going to be suffering from these seasonal allergies, I at least want it to be warm and sunny. So this morning, as the season turns, I have been playing around with that word, as I imagine Kathleen would do. The turn of the season, taking your turn, turning around, turning the calendar page, a turn of phrase, a turn for the worse, at every turn, out of turn, turn something on its head, one good turn deserves another, taking a wrong turn, not knowing where to turn, turning inward, turning to one another, returning. I actually had to stop myself there because there were hundreds and hundreds of expressions with the word turn in them, and so many of them were quite resonant with what we do around here. Why we come together on Sundays, why we seek community, why we have a faith life at all. We seek time and space to intentionally turn inward, to reflect. We turn to one another for support and encouragement. We want to turn our world toward more justice. We return to our spiritual home week after week because returning to center gives us pause, gives us perspective, gives us a sense that we are part of something larger than ourselves. I think of that opening song by the choir, return again, return to the home of your soul. And I hope that when we are at a point in our lives where we do not know where to turn, this place comes to mind, and we make our way here, and we find at least a part of that peace we were looking for. I know that the Outer Cape Chorale is busy preparing a concert full of Mary Oliver poetry this season, so I thought I would slip some into my sermon today. In her poem, How It Is With Us, How It Is With Them, Mary Oliver writes, we become religious, then we turn from it. Then we are in need and maybe we turn back. We turn to making money. Then we turn to the moral life. Then we think about money again. We meet wonderful people, but lose them in our busyness. We are, as the saying goes, all over the place. Steadfastness, it seems, is more about dogs than about us. One of the reasons we love them so much. Turning to each other and then losing sight of one another and returning, it's a very human behavior. Turning to the moral life and then thinking about money again. Being all over the place in our busyness. It is such a good description of our human condition. Were we but dogs, then we could be steadfast. But instead, we are turning creatures. But I love that Mary Oliver seems to agree that turning, although not ideal, not dog-like, can be religious. There is, of course, also a danger in our turning. We can turn away from our values as well as re-finding them. We can turn sour. We can turn bitter. We can turn moody. Our turning can be like a storm, suddenly darkening a sky. People become wary of us. They begin to carry umbrellas. If we are finding ourselves turning very quickly from happiness to tears, joy to anger, adoration to blame, that is something to watch out for, be mindful of. Maybe check in with our therapists about. But turning can also be a gift, a choice, a sacred task. What are some of the sacred turns we can take? Turning to beauty and joy after anger, grief, or despair. Turning our eyes up to the blue sky after months of gray. Turning inward when we need to recenter ourselves. Turning to one another when we are struggling. Turning it all over when the world is too much for us. This morning I share 3 stories of turning. The first is turning inward. Anne LeClaire is an author who lives here on the Cape. She wrote a book a number of years ago called Listening Below the Noise, which chronicled her adventure of turning inward after choosing to spend 2 days each month in silence. Anne was an unlikely candidate for an oath of silence. The concept was alien to my personality, she admits. In high school, I was once given 3 detentions in a single study hall because I found it impossible to sit through 40 minutes without talking to the girl next to me. The idea to stop talking struck her while she was walking on a beach. A disembodied voice told her, "Sit in silence." And oddly, the voice didn't frighten her, she said. For some reason, it did not cause me to panic or question my stability. And no, I don't think I was being sent messages from heaven. But she did listen to the message. The next day, she stopped talking for the first time in her life. Anne's practice of silence, which she has kept up for 2 days every month ever since that voice spoke to her all those years ago, has offered her many gifts. She learned to more deeply value her life and her relationships. She connected with her inner self. She learned about forgiveness and letting go. The practice also helped correct her tendency to be critical of others. Once at an artist's retreat, she listened as the others introduced themselves. I slipped into critical mind, she said. One was boastful, another authoritative, still another boring, and a fourth dominated the conversation. I was not speaking, but my mind was busy. Impatient, disapproving. Once again, I was so busy judging, I was unable to hear. I was separated from my fellow artists not only by my silence, but by my own insecurities, which had engendered a need to be superior, so very often a place out of which judgment is born. Slowly, by turning inward, in silence, and really listening to her thoughts as they arose, Anne was able to make another shift, to turn away from judgment of herself and of others. And then she was really able to listen. The second turning story I have for you is the most extraordinary story I've ever heard of people turning toward one another instead of away. It takes place back in September when there was a huge Trump rally in Washington, D.C. Activist Hawk Newsom and some of his other friends from the Black Lives Matter movement stood defiantly at the edge of the rally, offering what he saw as a counter-message to the Trump supporters. As the president of Black Lives Matter of Greater New York, Newsom was prepared to spend the day engaging in tense exchanges with people he knew would not be receptive to his message. Instead, Tommy Hodges, one of the organizers of the Trump rally, made an unexpected move. Today's rally, he said directly to Newsom, is about freedom of speech. It's about celebration. So what we're going to do is something you're not used to. And we're going to give you 2 minutes of our platform to put your message out. Whether they disagree or agree with your message is irrelevant. It's the fact that you have the right to have the message. It's your right to say what you believe, and it's their right to let you know what they think about what you're saying. Some of the Trump supporters booed at this invitation, and some of his own friends urged him not to engage. But, heart in his throat, Newsom decided to accept the invitation and go up on stage. I am an American, he said, and the beauty of America is that when you see something broke in your country, you can mobilize to fix it. Some of the crowd continued booing, but some began to nod. So you ask why there's a Black Lives Matter, Newsom said. Because you can watch a black man die and be choked to death on television and nothing happens. We need to address that. Hey, no, shut up. That was a criminal, one woman shouted. But Newsom continued talking, slowly, steadily, without anger. We are not anti-cop, he said, eliciting a mixed reaction from the crowd. We are anti-bad cop, he continued. We say if a cop is bad, he needs to get fired, like a bad plumber, a bad lawyer, like a bad politician. The crowd seemed to like this. A few people cheered. But then someone else from the crowd shouted, "All lives matter." Newsom addressed the heckler directly. You are so right. All lives matter, right? But when a black life is lost, we get no justice. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. Seeing that his 2 minutes was coming to a close, Newsom ended by saying, if we really want America great, we do it together. And then the crowd cheered. Afterward, some of the Trump supporters approached him and expressed their appreciation for his speech, including a Bikers for Trump member who asked if Newsom would pose for a photo with his grandson. After a video of the impromptu speech went viral, some activists were critical of it, saying that real change is systemic and that it's counterproductive to focus on a story of a handful of people being able to talk together in a new way. But that's not how I see it. In that story, I saw a sacred turn happening. In her book, Turning to One Another, Margaret Wheatley writes, I believe we can change the world if we start listening to one another again. I still believe this. I still believe that if we turn to one another, if we begin talking with each other, especially with those we call stranger or enemy, then this world can reverse its darkening direction and change for the good. And I know with all my heart that the only way the world will change is if many more of us step forward, let go of our judgments, become curious about each other, and take the risk to begin a conversation. So we have a story of turning inward and a story of turning to one another. And now I share a final story with you about turning things over to a source beyond ourselves. It's kind of like the third step in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's from the author Anne Lamott from her book, Traveling Mercies. She describes her descent into substance abuse and self-loathing. At rock bottom, she is alone, drinking and popping pills day after day, night after night, hoping that perhaps one morning she won't wake up at all. Out of nowhere, she suddenly has the sense that Jesus is crouching in the corner of her bedroom, watching her with an unending patience and love. Raised in a secular family, she is appalled. "I'd rather die than let you in," she says out loud to the apparition. And she continues on her path of self-destruction. But somehow she can't shake the Jesus figure. So that Sunday she goes to a church service, so hungover that she can't even stand up for the hymns. The sermon strikes her as completely ridiculous, like someone trying to convince me of the existence of extraterrestrials, she remembers. But then the final hymn cracks her wide open. It was as if the people were singing in between the notes, she said, weeping and joyful at the same time. And I felt like their voices or something was rocking me in its bosom, holding me like a scared kid. And I opened up to that feeling, and it washed over me. Anne left before the benediction. Crying, she ran from the church and raced home, Jesus running alongside her like a cat at her heels. And when she opened the door to her house, she stood there a minute, and then grudgingly, so grudgingly, took a deep breath and said, "All right, you can come in." That was her moment of finding faith. And although it didn't happen that day, Anne has been sober for 32 years. And maybe you won't find Jesus crouching in your bedroom. And maybe you will never face a crowd full of people hating you and be brave enough to point out what you have in common. And maybe you won't decide to spend 2 days in silence each month. But throughout this week, I invite you to turn inward, turn toward a friend, turn your sorrows and regrets over to a power greater than yourself. Turn your face up to the blue sky whenever it finally appears, even if you have become so accustomed to seeing gray. I invite you to make even the smallest turn when you can and see how it feels. Use any excuse, any reminder to return to who you are. Return to what you are. And of course, I invite you to return here next week to this beloved community. In her poem, Annunciation, Marie Howe writes, "Even if I don't see it again, nor ever feel it, I know it is, and that if once it hailed me, it ever does. And so it is myself I want to turn in that direction, not as towards a place, but it was a tilting within myself, as one turns a mirror to flash the light to where it isn't. I was blinded like that and swam in what shone at me, only able to endure it by being no one, and so specifically myself, I thought I'd die from being loved like that." May it be so for each of us. Amen, and blessed be.